the international dimension of serving as a goodwill ambassador for UN Women, previously UNIFEM since 1995, I also think of as an honor. I am equally proud of my close relationship with the University of Jordan as a board member of the Center for Women's Studies and an external board member of the Faculty for Graduate Studies. Together with others here in Jordan, I have been well aware that throughout the controversial exchange between the Jordan University and its critics, troubling and conflicting dimensions underlie different sides of the arguments being made. Nevertheless, what is presently foremost in my mind is neither international pressure nor the close association with the various entities both here in Jordan and outside. In fact, for me, what validates these ties is to say unequivocally that under any circumstances, the safety and well-being of any female student is non-negotiable. Whether they are studying at the University of Jordan or other academic institutions in the country, or doing their research in other parts of the Arab region or further afield, all young women have a right to a safe and productive learning environment. There will always be obvious as well as more subtle factors, together with varying interests and agendas at play, which shape events as they evolve in different contexts. None of us are naive to believe otherwise. However, my hope for the Arab region, to which I am immensely proud to belong, is that dominant social paradigms will continue to shift, easing the way for both women activists and researchers to raise the questions that need to be asked. Nevertheless, we must also recognize that research alone and activism alone will not necessarily bring about a change in policies or the way they are implemented. Indeed, an adaptable combination of research and activism may be called for under different circumstances, while one informs and reinforces the other. Above all, what is vital is a constant re-evaluation of this critical juncture in the Arab world, which carries the spirit of reform. For while we preserve our own sense of identity and worth, our values and our autonomy, as Arab women, we must ensure that no backtracking occurs to impair our hard-won gains, so that in practice, the rights and needs of our region's women constitute a serious part of the reform process for activists, researchers, and policymakers alike. This is the time for clarity, ingenuity, flexibility, and especially staying power by those seeking to amend social policy. I am a strong believer that a key asset to any effort lies in building on existing structures and drawing on their history and experience while working simultaneously on processes and approaches that stimulate reform. And here at the Jordan University, we are celebrating 50 years since its establishment, so there's a lot of history and experience here. And for this reason, I believe that here in Jordan we can achieve a constructive model for engagement between activists and researchers through the University of Jordan. This is an important moment for the Nordic Arab Network and the Center for Women's Studies. I look forward to hearing about the significant initiatives and productive achievements that will surely follow, because now, without doubt, is most certainly the time for women making change. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Royal Highness, for your continuous support to the Center for Women's Studies and your sponsorship to this seminar. It's our great pleasure and honor to welcome Your Highness. Now, we welcome Dr. Drew Dahler, a professor of political science at the University of Stockholm, who is currently running a large international research project titled Gender Quotas in Politics, a Key to Equality, to present us the inclusion of women during processes of democratization. Please.
Your Royal Highness, Mr. President, dear colleagues and friends, I'm going to speak about women and democratization, which is a very vibrant topic for all countries in the world. But of course it's especially interesting for what is happening, very exciting things happening in the Arab world right now. You know, when I was a young schoolgirl, we were taught that democracy started in ancient Greek. We were taught that the decision-making processes taking place in the central square of the city-state of Athens was the birth of democracy. What we were not taught, and that was especially important for us girls, we were not taught that those who were sitting, with a modern word, deliberating, making decisions in the square of the city-state of Athens were only men. And not all men were there either, because the immigrants were not allowed, and the slaves were not allowed, and then women were, of course, excluded. We were taught then, and I think that, believe that still people are being taught that in many schools, that this was the birth of democracy. This is making a focus on the structures of the way you make decisions, which of course is important. This is the how of democracy. But what I want to talk about here is the who of democracy. Who are participating, and the importance that the decision-making structures also have a full participation of women and of other groups who at presently are underrepresented. And I will argue, and I believe that there is a new discourse in the world right now. A discourse that a democracy and a process of democratization requires the involvement of all groups in society. And especially, this is the subject here, involves the inclusion of women. This is one of the topics that we are studying in the many women's studies centers around the world. I want to congratulate the Center for Women's Studies here at Jordan University for the excellent preparation of this conference, but I'm also very impressed by the many students you have here. I think you have more students than most women's studies centers around the world. So, what is the link between including women and processes of democratization? And can we talk about democracy if women are not included? Formally, parts of the world, de facto included. And I want to show you some examples here of the new discourse of, to take it short, no democracy without full inclusion of women. This is the Biden Platform for Action from 1995. It's a very important document, and so many women's organizations around the world are referring to this document because it is a very important document. What does it say? Well, it says that for the full functioning of democracy, women have to be included. I'm not really sure whether this kind of phrasing includes that or implies that there was a democracy before women, because I don't think we can talk about a democracy if women are not included. But they say that if to have democracy working, you have to have women included. And that it is not a democracy if women are not there. This is a very important document. But there are many more documents, and I'm going to show you some. This is the African Union. And the African Union has made this very solemn declaration about the convention, which you probably know, all of you, the 1325, which is that if you're going to have a peace process in a post-conflict situation, it's vital to include women in this process. It is vital to include women in this process. Not only for the sake of women, which of course is important, but also for the sake of changing and for creating peace. And I would add that peace is a prerequisite for a process of democratization. In fact, you may say that any kind of war or violence is strengthening the patriarchal system. Peace is a condition for the inclusion of women, as an condition also for democracy. Let me show you some more. This is the European Women's Lobby, and they have this interesting phrase. They're saying that the current underrepresentation of women in most elected assemblies in Europe, including in the European Parliament, is a serious democratic deficit. And it's threatening the legitimacy of the European institutions. And this is a new way of putting it, legitimacy. Because legitimacy is about that you accept and you trust the government, the political system. And also that you're willing to accept decisions even if you don't like them. Because you accept the very system as being a legitimate system. And now what they're saying here, that if women are not there, this is legitimate. And this is a new discourse in my mind. Because I think that, well, go back 20, 30, 40 years, and if you saw a government with only men, many people would say, oh, this is a very trustworthy, it's a very safe kind of decision-making body. Today, if any government is being appointed without women, there is a question of the legitimacy. I understand that today you have 3 women out of 30, 10% in the government of Jordan, and I think this is very important. I think it's Saudi Arabia can still go away with this, but not countries we think that will want to have an open decision-making process. And here's an example from Morocco. And here, what I do is I quote one of the papers given to this workshop, written by a young scholar called Mohammed Yahuti. And he's quoting a memorandum by a coalition of women's organizations in Morocco, which was given to the committee which was making the new constitution. And the name of this memorandum, I think, is very interesting. The name of the memorandum is "For a Constitution that guarantees effective equality of women and men as an indicator of democracy." That is a rather radical formulation, and I love it. Well, let me pose some more complicated questions then, because what is really the connection between democracy and representation? And the first question is, and I almost answer that, is democracy possible without equal representation of men and women? And I say 30, 40 years ago, yes. And when I went to school, yes, nobody said that it wasn't a democracy. Nobody said that Switzerland was not a democracy until 1971, even if women were excluded on account of their sex or their gender from. I mean, there were no boycott of Switzerland. Can you remember that? No. There should have been. So I think this is a new discourse saying that in order to talk about a process of democratization, you have to have a full inclusion of women. But the next one is more difficult. Is equal representation possible without democracy. What is the answer? Well, look at Rwanda. Rwanda, which is not listed as a democracy, a full democracy, a semi-democracy maybe, has the highest number of women in the world. The only parliament with a majority of women, 56%. So yes, it is of course. It would also be possible for the king of Saudi Arabia to appoint a parliament with 50% women. Doesn't even need an election for that in that country. But the interesting thing is, of course, whether the inclusion of women create democracy or contribute to the process of democratization. And I'm going to speak a little about that. Let's first take the theoretical perspective to this question. I already mentioned the Beijing, and let me mention a few scholars. One is British Anne Phillips, who wrote this similar book, The Politics of Presence. We use that for our students, and they love it very much. Anne Phillips is talking the politics of presence, is saying representation is not just about ideas, ideology. It's also about those, the who are the people who are entitled to be part of the decision making. And of course it's not like this that all women have one political ideology and men have one other. But for instance, if you say that all political parties should include women, then you have this combination which he talks about. Combination of politics of ideas and politics of presence in this case. Also, Iris Marion Young in her book Inclusion and Democracy and many other books have talked about this. And they both start from a political, theoretical point of view of deliberation, saying that who are part of the deliberation which are solving the problems, but also who are part of the construction of the problems. Because the way we pose the questions are extremely important for the way we also find the solutions. There are many different ways of posing questions. Yes, please. But there's also a practical perspective to the combination of democratization and women, and I'm going to mention some. The demand for more women in politics is also one of the main arguments for the mobilization of women and of women's network. And you know, in fact, women don't have to agree upon what to use this new power for, because women are being excluded on account of our sex, and that's why women can work together to include women. Maybe after the inclusion there will be different, or I'm sure there will be different opinions among women, but the fact of being excluded on account of your gender is one of the things that unite women and can make very large women's organizations, as we have seen all over the world. Changing the political agenda is of course extremely interesting. What is on the political agenda? I come from Scandinavia, and before 1970s there was no discussion about daycare or taking care of the children by the public. But when the more and more women enter politics, and now we have about 30–40% women in the parliaments. In Sweden it's 45. Now this is part of the public agenda. How are we going to take care of range our society when women are in the labor market and we need public daycare is the discussion. So the agenda in itself changes. Of course, the public policy is also very important for this kind of changes. And then I add, since I'm one of those who study electoral systems and gender quotas, I'm very interested in this last point, which is saying that the whole demand about including women is opening what we in political science call the secret garden of nomination. And what is the secret garden of nomination? Well, the fact is when the voters go to the polling station and vote, many of them think that they decide who gets elected. Well, in many cases, it's already decided. I'm sorry to say that. When I say that to my students, they say, no, that's not true, is it? Well, you know, the political parties have already nominated the candidates. And in many systems with closed lists, it's already decided who's number 1, who's number 2, who's number 3. It's already decided who is standing, who is nominated in the good constituencies for that party, where the party is strong, and who is in the bad constituencies. That is extremely important. So many of the very crucial decisions about who's going to be elected has already been taken by the political parties. And very often this process is very secret in all countries of the world. And the demand for having more women in politics is part of the process of opening this secret garden of nomination, making it more transparent, but also formalizing it. Having a committee which is coming up with having a meeting where you can decide who's going to be the candidate, open it up. And this is also a way of including more women, because there are, in many political parties there are, I'm afraid to say, old boys networks who are deciding who gets the good seats. Here you have the figures for women's representation all over the world as it is today. 20% women in politics in all the parliaments of the world. That means that men have 80 or rather 79.5% of all seats in parliament. This is not parity or parity. It's far from it, but it's improving. It's improving, although slowly. The Nordic countries, which is Denmark, Norway, Finland, Iceland, and Sweden, is high, 42% for the 5 countries together. 42%. So the parliament would look like this assembly maybe, or maybe more men. So there's almost a